forces the marketplace to adjust, right? Like we saw at first they criticized it, but then the health systems did it too, right? So they came up with new models of care as well. And maybe they'll find that concierge care creates better outcomes. Well, then maybe that would cause the entire health system to reevaluate how long it's spent with patients or the type of care provided. I'm not to say that it will or that I know that, but I'm saying I don't look at these innovations in the marketplace as a bad thing. I think ultimately it allows physicians to be treated better, hopefully healthcare to be better. And so I don't think it's fair to penalize some of these for doing new things when other industries are allowed to innovate and challenge the marketplace and do different models. I think there's room for everyone, is my
opinion. If you remember,
this podcast is produced by Concierge Medicine Today, LLC. All rights reserved. Concierge Medicine Today, or CMT, was founded in 2007 and serves as the industry's trade publication and annual medical conference organizer. Please note, the information shared on this podcast and across all CMT platforms is intended for general informational purposes only and may contain errors or omissions. Nothing in this podcast nor across CMT platforms constitutes medical, financial, legal, nor professional advice, and CMT is not liable for any inaccuracies. CMT encourages listeners to conduct their own research and consult trusted advisors before taking any action based on the content presented. No mention, interview, or link should be considered an endorsement. This content is primarily intended for a healthcare audience and may not apply to all listeners. Thanks for tuning in.
You're listening to Concierge Medicine Today's Docpreneur Leadership Podcast. Today we have a legal eagle. We have Jonna Eimer, and she is a shareholder at Roetzel Andress. I'll let you discuss who that is and what you do, but legal expertise and it moving into concierge medicine, regardless of your optics or perception of it, it's not a one size fits all. And there's a lot of, I always say, you should go get your unofficial MBA in this space and understand what you're getting into as a physician before you even consider it. And so, Jonna Eimer, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here and excited to talk about this, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about with you. So thank you very much.
Well, I love the space of anything that brings, regardless of the model or regardless of its terminology or brand or perception, I love anything that brings a patient and physician closer together, because I think that, as we talked about off air, a doctor's words weigh 1,000 pounds, right? 5 words from me or my doctor, can be like, Mike, we need to talk. And you're like, oh no, can you come into the office, or, hey, are you available for a call? So, Jonna, tell us a little bit about what you do on a daily basis, and then we'll kind of jump into some more pointed questions.
Yeah, thanks so much for that intro. Well, I represent many, many physicians and healthcare providers, whether it's setting up their practices, employment work, selling their practices, regulatory concerns. So all those things, and of course, setting up concierge practices. So setting up lots and lots of concierge practices, converting concierge, traditional practices to concierge. So everything in and around the healthcare provider space is really where my practice focuses. And so I've been helping doctors and healthcare providers for 25 some odd years now. And it's really the area I like. And like you said, it's really this, especially with concierge practice, it's really this personalized care and model that, was really driven, like we were talking about before, about patients, I think, really wanting, and doctors wanting, this more personalized and specialized approach to care and knowing and having this relationship with their patients. So that's what I do on a daily basis. Sometimes I kind of act as even outside general counsel to them of day-to-day issues that come up, whether they're corporate or shareholder employment, anything that comes up with their concierge or traditional model of practice.
So for years, we've been trying to kind of put a visual around the membership medicine space or the subscription-based healthcare delivery space. And I look to things outside of healthcare as a great example. We saw a membership economy start. Remember, I'm sure we've all heard the story about when Netflix went to Blockbuster, and Blockbuster essentially said, yeah, we don't need you, and it's now, where's Blockbuster? It's an interesting story to see how subscriptions and memberships have moved into our atmosphere as customers. And I'm not a physician, but I am a patient, and I do know what it's like to sit on the other side of the phone, the voicemail, the website, or the doctor's office, or even, sit in the lobby chair across from your staff. And concierge medicine, I think today in the membership medicine economy, it has, for me, many different branches off of the family tree. But one of the bigger branches is um, this more routine care, customary, personalized care, where there's probably 2,000 plus or minus kind of nationally affiliated physicians, but probably another 2,000 independents, like what you're talking about and who you talk to every day and help move into concierge care. And then I would say that there's the bespoke side, which is what gets most airplay and kind of sucks the wind out of the room, because everybody assumes that the bespoke or luxury high-end healthcare of concierge medicine of the 90s is still today what all concierge medicine is, and it's really just not. And then you've got this kind of third, kind of low cost, I wouldn't consider it a low cost leader, but there's a low cost subscription to that called direct primary care, all on the family tree of membership medicine. Is that kind of how you see this space?
It is. It is. And I would agree with you. The really fancy elite, like Ritz-Carlton, expensive, super expensive concierge practices seem to get all the attention and kind of criticism. And that's not really the bulk of what I see. The bulk of what I see is really in that middle area of more modest fees, ranging anywhere from $1,000 to maybe 6, 7, 8,000. Not saying that that's not a lot of money, but like you said, it's not all that super fancy, medical care. It's people who now see, and like you said, with this advent of membership models in other consumer areas, where I think once upon a time, people didn't see the need for it, and maybe the health system wasn't as congested as it is now. But now when you call your health system or provider and you have to wait months and months to be seen, all of a sudden this membership model is easier to swallow, right? Where I think consumers were like, I don't want to pay for this. I get this for free. I have insurance. And obviously everybody, is entitled and should get care under their insurance and hopefully do get good care. But as that care model, it becomes more, congested in this system, and you have to wait months for access. I think patients are seeing the value of paying for seeing their doctor when they want to see it, right? And when you think about that, whether it's a few $1,000s, a lot of these people pay a lot more for that, like you said, for whatever other subscription they're doing, like their fancy gym or not so fancy gym. So I think doctors are thinking, well, this is your health. If you wouldn't pay, this is something we want to be on this journey with you to pay, maybe slightly more and have this really personal relationship with you, where you can get us when you need us, and we're here for you day and night and 24/7. And it's not right for every patient, nor does it have to be. Like that's when it's not a one size fits all. There's room in the marketplace, I think, for all of these different models, whether it's that really high end bespoke care, like you're saying, where they're really fancy, you think celebrities or athletes having it. But then there's enough room in the middle for other, normal people who just realize they want more or increased access and care and services than what their traditional kind of private practice or even healthcare based, physician is offering right now.
And for those physicians who are kind of, curious and kind of wondering, like, oh, I'm really interested in this conversation, I want to come at it from a patient perspective of, patients today, when we think of luxury, we think of convenience. I mean, my daughter, she's 18 years old now. She's making incredible decisions based on AI and her what the feedback is from that. That future generation of your patients are making decisions very differently, and convenience is king. And I think of, when our doctor calls and says, hey, we need to talk, I don't want to wait, 3 weeks before I get in there to have this conversation. Like, let's just have the conversation. And he's like, no, because then I can't bill for it.
Yeah. Let's get on a telehealth call and or conference in the next 30 minutes. And that's what some of them are willing to do, and that's what the patients, like you said, they're paying for that convenience, which maybe not everybody wants or needs, but I think there's room in the marketplace for all these different models to exist and hopefully help each other innovate differently and think about healthcare and the delivery of healthcare goods and services differently. And hopefully ultimately make the delivery and the healthcare everyone gets better, right? As these different models innovate around these new practice models, and hopefully it makes everybody look at healthcare differently.
So our guest today is Jonna Eimer. She is a health law attorney and shareholder at Roetzel Andress, and it's based in Chicago. And we will put the links of a recent article that she recently wrote, Concierge Medicine on the Rise from Chicago to Florida, but not a one-size-fits-all. We'll put that link in how to connect with Jonna in the show notes below. But from your perspective, let's walk through a typical interaction with a doctor, and then we'll have to kind of pull which lever of doctor are we going to pull. But let's talk about the health systems first, because that kind of seems to be a recurring trend this past year or two, where more health systems are kind of where they were not so friendly towards, executive health and concierge care. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing, and then the parallels behind these programs and routine executive healthcare today.
Yeah. So, I mean, originally, I didn't see much of this in the health system space, but now we're seeing it a lot of really big health systems and are offering their own versions of concierge care, executive health, all these different programs. But a lot of doctors come to me who either were in that kind of model, even in some of them even practice concierge at a health system and felt like that wasn't exactly the way they wanted to practice exactly, because maybe the access and the care and the personalization wasn't exactly what they wanted. There's still this overarching entity and corporation that's controlling a lot of the interaction and even the call centers at these big, right, facilities. It creates a lot of distance, they said, between them and the patient, kind of getting in the way. And sometimes they would say the patient was upset with me before they saw me because of the call center. So a lot of times my interactions start with a health system like practitioner, primary care, or other doctor who calls me and says they've either done like a traditional kind of care at a health system, or they were in their concierge or executive health program, and now they're looking to do it on their own, either to join an existing concierge practice or to start their own. And so the conversation we usually have is first, what are the steps? First of all, they usually tell me about their burnout and exhaustion and the volume of patients they're required to see and the time and all that thing. And all of it, I understand. I get, and that they want to go back to usually more of a traditional kind of, they say a traditional model of medicine, maybe something that our grandparents got to experience, where you do your doctor and you called up and it was one person and they knew your family and they knew your kids and they knew your partner. So a lot of them call with kind of that as the tone, more than I want to have this super fancy celebrity practice. And then from there, we talk about what they need to do to begin the practice. So we look at how to get out of their current contracts and notice provisions to get out of those. And then, of course, there's the non-compete and non-solicitation issues that are always state specific. And so we go through those together and see how we can do this in a way that doesn't violate those existing contracts that they have. And then we talk about exactly what kind of practice and concierge model they want it to be, right? Like, so do they want, like, what services do they see? What type of access do they see? Are they talking cell phone? Are they talking same day? Are they talking others kind of specialty services like women's health or men's health or other, dietitian and wellness services and preventative services? So we kind of go through exactly what they're looking for. But I do see your point. There is a lot of overlap with the executive health program as well. But what I see as the differences is really that, I guess, access or availability, for lack of a better word, right? You still can't call and get in same day. In my experience, in most of these executive health programs, where you'll get an increased, services and wellness plans and stuff like that, but you're not getting necessarily the cell phone and the immediate access and personalized care that maybe some of these concierge patients are looking for.
So when we think of leaving a health system, you're some of them, it seems like some of the conversations we've had are, well, I don't know about my non-compete, so I'm going to need to talk with an expert about that. And that's kind of where you come in.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's like, I'm kind of scared to leave, or, and I feel like we're starting to see the conversation happen where it's like, I like my job. Like, I like the place. I like the people, somebody says, you don't quit the customer or the job. You typically quit your boss, And so it's like, if you got a bad boss, yeah, of course you're probably going to leave. And so that happens a lot. But, the conversation that physicians are like, I want to stay. So how do I have this conversation with my administrators, the bearers of who get all the flack, and rightfully so in some cases. But are you having conversations with those types of physicians who are saying, I don't want to leave, I don't want to do all the work, I just want them to start it, and I'll be the recipient, and I'll be the tool.
Yeah, and in that case, I usually just, they'll get an employment agreement just like a other health system physician, and they'll work within the concierge program, like we said, are already really established. So in the old days, we were kind of presenting them like, would you consider doing this? What about this? But now most of them have it. So you're just asking if you can be a part of it. Does it have room? And then they give, that doctor an employment agreement, just like they give other doctors, and set, compensation and how it'll work in their specific program. But in my experience, it's not, excuse me, a lot of room for them to make it really specific to that doctor. They've set up a program. Obviously, they're a big health system of how they want it to look. So they want a little uniformity, and it can work really well for some doctors. And it's the perfect answer for some doctors because they don't want to leave. Most of them don't, hate their employers, and they certainly, not their colleagues. They like all of them. And they have a lot of, when they first approach me, misgivings often even about the whole concept of concierge, right? That they're very, I would say, very noble, care-driven providers, and they're a little even sad to want to jump into this new world and not have all their patients come with, or at least not feel like they can come with, or feel like they have the means to come along with this next part of their care. And so they struggle with it, and do they really want to make the switch? And some decide they really don't. Maybe they're going to cut down hours or do different things to make it more workable within their system. Maybe they'll go to executive health or the concierge program within their system. And then for the ones that really make sense, they might join, an existing concierge practice or start their own. But certainly we have all those conversations when a doctor approaches me, and a lot of them are not even legal, right? It's kind of like soul searching. Do I want to do this? Is this, I struggle with, is this what I went into medicine for? I don't want to eliminate access, or add to shortages in healthcare. So they struggle with all that. It's not that they're, like I said, they're not, most of mine, at least the bulk of them are not charging these exorbitant fees, even when they do start their own. They want to charge enough to obviously have a good lifestyle and pay their bills, and hopefully see fewer patients for longer amounts of time. I can't say they're really working less. They're just working differently,
Oh, absolutely.
And
most of
some aren't even making more. They're making the same as they were making in the health system, but they're just practicing differently, and they feel like they were just toiling on this treadmill that they could get off. In certain, not all cases, but certain areas or people. And so for them, it makes a lot of sense to try something new. Right? Because the healthcare world wouldn't be better if these people that were so exhausted and burnt out just stopped practicing. That wouldn't do anybody any favors. So I think it's better to keep them in the system and let it innovate and do these different models that some patients really want anyway. And then, the ones that don't, like I said, they're going to get, good and great care at the health system and traditional models of practice as well. They just lose out on some of that convenience, like we said.
There's a lot to what you just said, and I think that that's the biggest boulder that I find every single week having conversations with doctors is that you were constantly trying to push the boulder up a mountain of, you got to get past this guilt that you have. And while it's altruistic and it's noble, being a doctor and wearing the license or the badge of honor of making no money and wearing that gets your badge of honor. Yeah, sure. There's nobility in that. But at the same time, yeah, sure. Are very few organizations who have probably done bad things, right? By making a lot of money and paying shareholders or whatever, lots and lots of for like nothing. But call me naive. I think that there's more good than bad out there, especially in healthcare. And I don't think we're giving doctors enough credit from the perspective of like, if we give you $1, you're going to spend it wisely. Like you're smart enough to know that you're going to pour it back into the business or the practice, or it's going to flow back into the community of who you serve. And so talk to us a little bit about how you address the argument, because it is a bit of a soul searching thing and there is guilt involved. And I was recently talking with someone who said, and I'll quote him, and he said, instead of allowing a combination of guilt and lack of accurate pricing market data to cause you to underprice and devalue your brand, consider instead pricing your practice at true market value. And so, consider using ad hoc scholarships, discounts, and employer funding to improve equitable access to cash healthcare. How do you address this moment when you're having dinner with a doctor and probably his spouse, and you're like, I don't want to add to the shortage, or you're talking to a critic, and he's like, yeah, those concierge doctors, like, and it's kind of, I find it kind of
They sold out or something.
yeah, humorous as like, so every other company and individual and organization has innovated except concierge care. Like they still follow the rules of the 90s in pricing. Like is that the only industry that has not ever evolved? Apparently it is, if you read the headlines. So how do you address the physician shortage or overcome some of those challenges that you conversate with?
They're all very smart people. They're well aware of all these issues when they're approaching this, and they've thought long and hard about whether or not they want to embark on this new type of practice. But usually when they come to it, they also have some misgivings about their current practice, right? So they don't feel entirely great about the care service they're providing. So it's not a perfect solution either, just to stay and continue what they're doing. And a lot of them that I talk to, like I said, they're in that not that exorbitant price range, and they look at it really, and how they get around it, I think, in their brains and souls, is like they're returning to a traditional model of healthcare where your patients and their families and their needs and wants in a way that maybe people were allowed to back in the day, but really modern medicine doesn't, and it's not anybody's fault. We have an abundance of people in need of healthcare and a growing and baby boomers and all these things, and there's just a ton of demand for healthcare services. So I'm not blaming anybody for these shortages, but I think there's room in the marketplace for all these people. And I don't think it's fair to penalize the providers who usually have done the one approach and maybe didn't find it worked for them personally or their patients, or certain patients. I don't think it's fair to penalize them for wanting to innovate and try something different. And I also say that it forces the marketplace to adjust, right? Like we saw at first, they criticized it, but then the health systems did it too, right? So they came up with new models of care as well. And maybe they'll find that concierge care creates better outcomes. Well, then maybe that would cause the entire health system to reevaluate how long it's spent with patients or the type of care provided. I'm not to say that it will or that I know that, but I'm saying I don't look at these innovations in the marketplace as a bad thing. I think ultimately it allows physicians to be treated better, hopefully healthcare to be better. And so I don't think it's fair to penalize some of these for doing new things when other industries are allowed to innovate and challenge the marketplace and do different models. I think there's room for everyone is my view.
If you remember the movie Scream, I think there was a famous line of like, well, the call's coming from inside the house. And most of the critics of concierge medicine or other subscription-based healthcare delivery models, especially in that squishy middle, and eventually it'll have able to have its own kind of maybe contemporary, customary brand. And I think we'll get there as the market evolves. But I remember back in the day when direct primary care wasn't even called direct primary care; it was called fee for care, and it was a whole different conversation back then. But things evolve, and healthcare it's dragging healthcare into the modern century. Is very difficult because it's a lot of evidence and show me the evidence, and we get that. So let's talk a little bit about the team that needs to be around a doctor when they're making these kind of career-based decisions. Obviously, they need expert legal insight and counsel. Who else is invited to the table? If you're like, let's get the band together, like the garage band. So who else do you tell doctors and their spouses, I'm sure, because you probably have had more conversations with spouses of these doctors than you've, care to count. Who else needs to be invited to the table?
Well, usually their accountants are involved or their financial planners, and then usually the bankers, right? They need bank loans oftentimes to get this started in a business plan. And as you and I discussed earlier, and sometimes there's consultants who are involved as well. So there's some big groups that do concierge consulting and charge a fee, and they charge a fee for a period of time. But there's other consulting groups that do a one-time kind of fee and just kind of help you get set up in practice, depending on your model, maybe help you find space or help you develop a marketing plan. So I think all this team, and then of course, any other providers, whether it's nurses and staff and reception administration or whoever you need, all those are so important to the whole team. So I think that's the team that I usually see when you're embarking on this new model of healthcare.
So a lot has changed, and I feel like doctors are not immune to, it's kind of, you and I have met doctors and had conversations with, it's like most, I would say 8 out of every 10 of them are, incredible individuals, incredible human beings. And then the other 2, out of 10 would be like, they want permission slips to complain. And I'm sure if we sat down, heard their story, it's like, wow, you were burned, but I don't think it's a no for now that you should move into this space, but not forever, like go get some mental health healing and don't think that everybody is a victim. Or that you're a victim. So for those that are
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, go ahead.
Also, like these concierge patients, some of them, even for a small fee, can be quite demanding. So if you think you're leaving a health system or some program, or a traditional model because you want to be like doing less, I don't know that that's necessarily the right thought process to go into it, right? You might, in some sense, be on call more, just differently. So if you're, when people approach me and it's just burnout, like you said, they're looking for something different than a new model of care. Maybe they need a vacation or something else, or to go part-time in their current health system. But I wouldn't look at, once you're a practice operator, manager, and provider, you're not necessarily doing less. You're just doing it differently,
Yeah, I remember talking, she has since passed away, but she was a concierge doctor. And I remember very clearly, we were at a little tiny circle table in Las Vegas at a conference. And she said, Michael, I still work 18 hours a day. I'm just happier doing it. Like I'm able to research more about this particular condition. And she's like, I still visit patients in the hospital. I still give my colleagues a hard time when they don't know what's going on. So let's talk a little bit about something that all physicians struggle with, and it's 2 things. They have to do with the business side of medicine. Now, there's always and we'll just address this tension or problem, tension to manage versus problem to solve. I don't know if I need to work with, a consultant or an attorney or these folks because I don't want somebody else telling me how to practice medicine. Well, understandable for sure. However, let's back into how many business credit hours did you get in medical school? And it's usually like half a dozen, and it's like, okay, so you got hundreds of medical school hours, right? Like, oh yeah. Okay, so who do you go to get advice from when you make a business decision? Oh, I totally go to my colleagues. And you're like, okay, so you do know when we marry these two ideas together, they got the same credit hours that you probably did too. So let's not make any more bad decisions because patients are too important. And a raving fan, according to the former CEO of Chick-fil-A, says, is someone who does three things: pays full price, visits more often, and tells others about the business. Marketing is a constant struggle. The business plan is a constant struggle. If I was to ask a physician, randomly right now, I bet they would just go to Google and be like, I'll just Google a business plan and I'll just follow that. I'm going to tackle each of those levers, those pain points. Let's talk about the business plan. Do you help with that, or
I do.
how
I
can
do
that
often.
how can you be of assistance?
Well, I have, just because I've done it enough that I've helped them, and I have, I'm not starting from scratch. So I have different ones, and to kind of start from and go over with them what their unique approach will be. So I can help with that. Usually what they need that for is when they're going to the bank. Like the bank is asking for some sort of plan in order to get their financing. So that's when I will help with their plan. But like you said, I think these people are they, even though maybe they didn't take a ton of business classes, they are very smart, and they usually come to me with an idea of how they want it to look, and I just help them get it onto paper, or just because they don't have the time. So I just put pen to paper with their ideas, and then of course make sure it's legally compliant and doesn't run afoul of any rules or regulations under the law. But a lot of times they really know how they want it to kind of run and the services they want to provide. So we'll work on that together many times. Or sometimes they'll take a first draft and give it to me, and then I'll say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? So yeah, oftentimes we will go through that together.
What when we talk about some of the regulatory considerations in the business plan, I remember talking with a concierge practice in Texas, and he said, hey, I took it this way. And again, like you said in your article that we'll link in the show notes below, is it's not a one size fits all. And so this particular practice said, I mean, I don't love payers by any means, but there's a good 5 out of the 30, that I'm going to keep for the first couple of years. Like, why shut off that revenue stream? It's not great. It's not awesome, but it's something. And it helps give me a little bit of a bridge financially to, until I continue to build out my practice. So what are some of those insurance considerations, Medicare considerations? What's your thoughts on that? And we're just touching on it because, again, you would need to contact Jonna about this.
It can get very technical, but yeah, the basic rule is you're not allowed to charge for something if you're accepting insurance. If you're accepting Medicare, Medicaid, you're not allowed to, and obviously Medicaid wouldn't be people who are embarking on a concierge program, but a Medicare patient, you're not allowed to charge them for something that's a covered service under Medicare. So that would be a violation of the rules, subject to, strict penalties, or you could be pulled out of Medicare entirely as a provider, which would be horrible for many providers. But so some of my providers, they'll keep Medicare, but no other commercial insurance. Some will keep Medicare and commercial insurance. And then we have to make sure nothing we're doing runs afoul of Medicare rules and regulations or the commercial payers and those payer agreements. And many, I will say more and more, are doing just they're just doing cash pay. They're doing no insurance. And like you said, it's because of the administrative ease of it. Sometimes there's a bridge where they'll keep insurance for a little while, or maybe keep Medicare. And it could be for a variety of reasons. It's this bridge, to keep people, keep some income stream. But it's also because a lot of them, they really have such longstanding relationships with some of these older patients, and they didn't want to lose them. A lot of mine don't even really necessarily need it. And it's hard for them because of the, hurdles you have to go through when you're accepting commercial and Medicare as a payment. But they just didn't want to, kind of abandon some of their patients who've been with them for so long. But yes, so the general rule is, though, if you're accepting commercial insurance or Medicare, you cannot charge the patient for something that's already a covered service under that program, because it would be like double dipping or double billing. You can't charge them twice for the same service. So you have to be very careful when you draft your patient agreement that you're not charging them for an already covered service.
And, so, I mean, what's your thoughts on, you will obviously do what the customer or the client wants. Like, so, okay, I want to stay in Medicare. We're going to outline in this contract, this patient agreement, so to speak, what this practice is going to provide, and we're going to continue with Medicare. We don't necessarily have to bill Medicare for anything because these are not insurance programs. This is not an insurance program, and it's not providing services that are covered by Medicare. It's outside of that. So how do you structure something like that? And like, how long does that typically take? Are they able to, say, okay, we can have you up and running next month? Or is this like, all right, we need to put some things in place? What's the next steps if they say, I want to keep Medicare?
Well, if you want to keep Medicare, then we make sure we outline it in the patient agreement that while we're not in network in any commercial payers, we are still a Medicare provider. So you just be very clear of what you're providing. I haven't had any client ask me to do something that, wasn't in accordance with the law. But we just make it very clear in the patient agreement what is covered, what isn't, and whether or not we accept Medicare patients. And if we've opted out of Medicare entirely as a practice, as a concierge practice, then you have to do an opt-out agreement in writing with each particular patient. So yeah, you definitely have to confront all those issues if you're going to keep being a Medicare provider.
So that kind of leans into that argument that the critics have about, well, now my doctor doesn't accept Medicare, so what do I do? Well, now we're adding to a shortage. Well, are we really, or are we saying we can still see you? You can still be our patient. Yeah, but I have to pay a fee now. And so I think that we kind of forget that, like, okay, if like, I think of it as my daughter does. Like, if she's a teenager in search of an iPhone, she's going to ask grandma for money. She's going to ask me for money.
Right.
We will find a way to afford what we really want or need. And so I think it's what's your argument? What's your thoughts on kind of that argument of shortage to, well,
It's a real issue. It's a good question. It's a real issue. But I don't know of anyone who calls a health system and is told they're never being seen. They always will be seen. I know there's a shortage and you might not get seen when you want to be seen. But you will be seen. So, I don't know, while I understand the worries and concerns of that patient, I do have doctors that they'll get so upset because they'll say this patient was so upset and they got mad at me for, converting my practice to concierge. And then they find out they belong to some super expensive gym that maybe is $500 a month. And so then they're like, well, they just don't value my
priorities,
right? It's what you value. And like I said, there isn't a one size fits all. You don't have to go with that doctor. Maybe that means that doctor is not right for you anymore and the fit isn't there. But the health system, not aware of anyone who called a health system and was just turned away. So, you just don't necessarily get it the minute you want it. But that's how the marketplace works, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is you already don't. If you call right now and have to wait. But the lucky thing is we live in the United States and we have great health care. And if you have a real live emergency, you go to an emergency room. And again, you might have to wait. I know it's not perfect. It's hard. It's difficult. They're completely swamped and overwhelmed as well, but you will get seen and you will get good care.
Yeah. I'm Canadian, so I'm probably one of the last Canadians on the planet to think that concierge medicine, these other subscription healthcare delivery models are a really good thing for healthcare. You're like, and so because as a writer and an overthinker, and my wife said, I don't need you to be an overthinker here, and I don't need you to underthink here. I need you to be right in the middle. And so I overthink everything. And so one of the things I thought of overthinking was this idea of fairness in healthcare. I was like, well, okay, well, we've tried that. Like, we tried that in Canada across the border. And I can tell you from my family's experience, a lot of them, like, they love their healthcare. Like, they don't mind. They're very almost like, they're just like, they get it. Like, I wasn't in line before, and there's nothing wrong with that. Well, that's not how it works here. It's like, well, that's great. Yeah. We can go walk into an emergency room. It's just the difference is, it's a little sooner and it's a heck of a lot more expensive. But I think that wrestling with that soul search of, well, I don't want to do this and my patients are going to get upset. I asked her name was Julie, years ago. I said, so how many patients out of 10, get really upset and be like, I'm stomping out and I'm just going to whatever. And she's like, it's like 1 to 3% out of,
Yeah,
a
most of my,
1,000.
yeah, most of my clients say the same. It's very few, and oftentimes they're like, oh, there's a few patients that maybe are extremely difficult anyway. And if
Yeah.
those are the ones that they complained in the current system as well, and they're going to complain in a new system or in concierge. And I can tell you, I've had some conversations with concierge physicians saying, oh, so relieved that one didn't follow. There's certain patients that require a lot more time and have a lot more complaining than others. So I think in
Mhm.
those situations, sometimes they were happy to get rid of them anyway. Like it was no longer a fit, right? They still deserve good health care, but then they don't have to go to that provider. There are other providers out there. And so
Yeah.
it isn't for every patient and it's not for every doctor.
And I think that the argument of fairness and the argument of shortage, it really kind of comes down to, from a patient perspective, I mean, I'm as thrifty as the next guy. I can't believe that I had to go after church and go to Burger King. I mean, I shouldn't admit that I'm eating at Burger King to my doctor because I'm sure he's listening. But I was like, $23. How did I spend $23 on fast food for a
Yeah.
lunch on Sunday afternoon? That's ridiculous. But nonetheless, I'm as thrifty as the next guy, but I value my doctor. And I think we've got to start. I remember he was a doctor years ago. He's now since retired. He said, um, we as primary care and family medicine doctors have to stop seeing ourselves as the center of the universe in healthcare. And we need to start taking some lessons from the innovation happening in telehealth and retail clinic playbooks and other places. And I think that, it's a leadership axiom, and I love bringing the leadership side of business into healthcare, even though it's very, very resistant to new ideas. One of the leadership axioms says, when you get small and personal, your customers will demand that you grow bigger. And the Habas Group, which is not a healthcare organization, but a research organization similar, I think, to maybe Gallup, I'm not sure. But they did a study of major brands in our lives and the effect of those brands and how much do we really enjoy using those brands on a regular basis. And they found recently, and I think that they updated every couple of years, the reason 74% of customers don't care if brands disappear is because they think that the brands don't care about them. In healthcare, we asked prospective patients who are actively leaving their traditional plan reimbursed, non-subscription based practice position. They're like, I'm looking for one of these types of doctors that we've been talking about today. And they're like, okay, so why are you leaving? And it's like, it's not cost. It's not price. Like, I'll pay whatever I got. I'm a teenager in search of an iPhone. I'll pay whatever.
Yeah, right.
But he or she spends less than 10, 15 minutes with me. They asked me less than 5 questions, and cost didn't even crack the top 5. Like, it wasn't even in the wheelhouse on the field. And so I think that there is a real lack of trust, and that was amplified over COVID, where now we have a population, especially younger populations. What's the future generation of patients going to look like?
Yeah.
I have 3 kids, and I want healthcare to look a whole lot better. And
Yeah.
I bring my kids to this group, this conference, and I say, give them some hope about what healthcare is going to look like for them in 20 years. Because if they can find a doctor like you, gosh, that's worth the price of admission right there. So from a marketing perspective, what advice do you have for doctors that are like, well, I'm going to market to my practice? What are some of the do's and don'ts?
Well, with marketing, there's rules around marketing and healthcare, as we all know. So I don't want to get into too many technical things about that. But when you're marketing, obviously can't guarantee results or guarantee that you're going to get, better outcomes by this care. But when you are marketing to about your practice, you certainly need to be truthful and need to be honest about the services you're provided and honest about the fee agreement and transparent about the pricing, right? So as far as marketing, what I go back to what I said before is most of my practices are doing some version of marketing the personalized, care aspect of the program. And like you said, cost is not the biggest, I feel like, driver of all these things. It's the relationship and how you feel when you're with your doctor, and whether you feel rushed and whether you feel like they know you are listening to you. So that's what they're really emphasizing, the personal approach and the relationship they'll have with you over a long period of time. And I really do feel like a lot of them like go back to that this is a more of a traditional version of medicine, where I know you and have a personalized care plan for you. I know your worries, concerns, all these things, your wellness, preventative needs, all these other things, that because I have time to talk to you, we're going to go into a lot more detail and a lot more in depth into what exactly I can do for you and what this relationship can look like. So while you're not guaranteeing outcomes or results, and you want to be fully transparent what the fees and membership fees are for, the marketing, I feel like, bent is really around the personalized care. Even I mean, the access to and the convenience factor and all that, those are wonderful. And being able to get, the cell phone and talk to the doctor who actually knows you, as opposed to the one who's on call and never doesn't even know you, your family, what you're supposed to look like on a good day, much less you show up in the hospital. They don't know what you look like on a good day, much less a bad day. So this is the idea that this person knows you. They know, if things aren't right, they have a really a good understanding of you and your health background when they approach it. And I think that's really where the ones that are successful, they really are not just marketing it, they really believe it, and they're really providing it. And so then their care really speaks for itself, because their patients then do the marketing, which I think as a provider of legal services, I get too, because most of my work is referrals from other concierge doctors or other doctors, who said, this, my lawyer cared about me and listened to me and gave me what I needed, and really, was there when I needed help or assistance. And I think for the doctors that do it for their patients, then their patients are often their biggest marketers, because
Absolutely.
it's what you're looking for. This is what I'm getting, and if this is right for you, this is wonderful.
Yeah. I think, again, I reference this. It was just such an impactful conversation with this doctor years ago. And I remember also saying, like, they don't call me a concierge doctor. I don't market that I'm a concierge
Yeah,
doctor on my
don't even really
website.
use that. And they don't necessarily even use that word. Some do, some don't,
Mhm.
you know?
And she said they still call me, by my last name, or they call me by
Yeah,
my first name.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I thought that was so intriguing. And I'm sure, you've bumped into doctors who you're like, you're gonna make it. There,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
not gonna have a problem with this.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
we're in dessert territory as far as marketing. Like,
Yeah.
you're gonna be all right,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you're fine. And then we bumped into other doctors who, I remember, I interviewed a doctor. She was a concierge doctor. She's amazing, in Florida, and she said, the biggest piece I have of advice for other clinicians moving into concierge or these models is, don't be a jerk. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. And that you
Good
could
advice for
throw
life.
that.
Yeah.
Yes, you could throw that blanket
Yeah.
over everyone in
Yeah.
healthcare. And I like to call it, I self-titled this and wrote a book about it this year called Remarkology. And it's the study of, or kind of not study, but it's the overthinking, so to speak, as I am, the overthinking of positive remarks, especially from patients. And what healthcare is lacking is a lot of remarks. Like, I want to go to a practice that I want to come back to. And most of the practices that you and I are probably 10, 15 minutes away from right now are going to have very uninviting, inhospitable, unwelcoming, unremarkable environments. They're forgettable. And I think what this space is creating is environments that are informing the patients, who are the customers, and saying, look, we have a deep culture of
Yeah.
appreciation. We're thankful that you chose to be here today. In fact,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
we cleaned up, like
Mhm.
we tidied the space. And like, why is the doctor's office, why aren't we making it as inviting as having someone into our living room for a conversation or a dinner party around the kitchen island? And I think that there's an active gratitude there, or an action of genius that is in this space. And one of my favorite authors, I hand this book out to like candy to doctors. I was like, you've got to read this book. It has nothing to do with healthcare, but it will help you in your marketing. And it's called "What Do You Want to Be Known For?" And he's been my mentor over the years. And he said this. He said, what do you want to be known for? And what are you known for? And the first question is what we say. But the second question is what customers say. And so in order to ensure, because it seems like doctors are always asking and seeking, like, I just don't know where this mysterious word of mouth new patient referral came from. And they're afraid to ask because it kind of looks, a little, it looks bad. But in order to ensure consistent growth, the goal of everyone in the organization, from your office manager to your nurse to you as the doctor, the goal of everyone in the organization should be to make the answers to what do we want to be known for and what are we known for match. This is also the most important challenge, I think, for any doctor of the future, because that's how you marry the two. And when we create a remarkable experience worth remarking about to others, then we've created a community and we're not just a commodity. And right now, I think so many clinicians, so many practices and facilities, not of their own fault and some of their own fault, are commodities. And that's how the future generation of patients, even my kids, look at the doctors in their lives. And so anything you want to add to that?
No, I agree with everything you're saying. I think that, when we're talking about marketing, it's so important. It's so important that the patient gets that feeling right away. And I will say these practices do feel different. You walk in and it's not that they've spent, I mean, there is some money, a lot of them spent aesthetically, but it's not crazy amounts of money. It's you walk in, it's even little things like lighting, and someone says hello and they greet you by name. And oftentimes you sit down in like a living room, it feels less sterile, and the doctor sits down with you before you even put on a gown or anything and sits there and talks with you maybe for an hour just to get to know you and interview you and meet you, right? Especially if you're brand new, to make sure that this fits and they can give you the care that they need. A lot of my physician clients will do that interview really free of charge. That's to see if we fit together and we want to go on this journey together. So like another area of marketing is just that, like you get into the space, it feels different. Your kind of blood pressure drops when you walk in. You don't have the sterile lights and this person, greets you by name and you sit down together and they spend a lot of time with you. And like you said, they're gracious and really grateful that you chose them and might choose to be in this practice with them. So it's an incredible marketing, feat from the beginning to you think of just the pamphlets or the brochures or the reach outs that you do or the meet and greets with patients, but it's all aspects of the experience, from how you feel when you walk in and how you're treated and how the staff treats you and how patients talk about you then to other patients, that word of mouth and making you feel like it really was a special and different experience. Then you really feel like this is value. This is something different than what I was getting before.
Yeah. And that builds trust, and it builds like, okay, I got a doctor to brag on at the bus stop, and it's like next time a family member says, who do you go to? You're like, oh, you've got to go see this so and
And that's
so.
the biggest compliment. You've got to see my doctor, he or she is wonderful. They really care about me. They know everything about me.
Yeah. I'll share this last story, and then I got 3 final short questions for you.
Okay, great.
But on that note of I don't feel as though these doctors necessarily need to market hard from a postcard, or, you've got to have a website. It's got to be compliant. You want to be compliant with Medicare, all these other things. But at the same time, there's 2 stories. One was, she's a friend of mine, and she was at the airport, and she posted, of her travel. It was a Facebook post, and she's like, 1-ply toilet paper, why even try? And it was like the label of the airport, right?
Totally.
And I thought that was just I love to borrow ideas when I'm, jumping to different places. And whether it's I was in one of those kind of school trailers that they put outside in the parking lots. And I walked into the bathroom. I was like, oh my goodness, they have the nicest paper towel dispenser. And then they didn't just put the cheap brown ones in there. Understandable if you wanted to, but they put like the Scots, like the softest stuff, and then the stuff that really works. And you're like, that's how you do it. Like, it's all the little tiny details. And so it's the mints in the bathroom at your dentist's office or the mouthwash station. And then, but I remember on Instagram just recently, there was a concierge doctor in Texas who was having like a 1-year anniversary, and she's got an amazing Instagram feed, very charismatic. Her and her whole team do all these fun videos. And one of the patients was like, I can't wait to be there. Like, that place is awesome. I almost fell asleep there. And I was like, that's the best compliment of these types of models that you could ever ask for. So final 3 questions for you. Before starting with the end in mind, or ending with the end in mind, valuations and exits. Is that something you can help with physicians who are leaving concierge or just leaving their practice in general?
Well, the valuations, I would say we usually get outside financial advisors to do the valuations, but exits, certainly. That's where the lawyers come in. We work closely with accountants and financial advisors to do those, exits. And figuring out the right way. Do you mean an exit like a practice sale? Or you mean exit like a physician termination? Because we do both. Like, lawyers are involved with all those. But as far as an exit like a sale, then we would work closely with, the financial advisors and brokers or whoever it is to sell the practice.
Yeah, I think that they're probably more selling. That's what we're starting to see more and more of as these physicians are kind of aging into retirement and wanting to leave, but they want to leave their patients, in good hands. And so when you look at those valuations and you're kind of, moving them forward, like, do you find that those valuations are like, well, the doctor's response is like, whoa, like, that's wrong? Or do you find that they're, like, okay, it's not what I wanted, but that's what looks like I'm going to have to get.
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety. So it depends on the practice and the doctor. So a lot of the doctors, I do a lot of sales to private equity. And so they've heard about those really big valuations and they're all looking to get those. And for some of them, that's available. Maybe they have a very big practice, a well-known branded name. Some of them, it doesn't exactly work the way they're envisioning because maybe it's really one provider and it doesn't have the scale that maybe a private equity firm is looking for. So maybe you're just selling to an individual physician. So yeah, the valuations can be tricky because everybody has this idea of this, kind of rosy glasses of what they've heard that the derms and the plastics are getting and even mental health and all these other spaces. And we're seeing some of that in the concierge space, but it really depends on the practice, how it's formed, the number of providers, where it's located, the branding, like, does it have a brand outside of just the one provider? So there's different things that go into that valuation and different things into the sale. But definitely
What would you
movement is getting more, like, the valuations are coming up, and I think that people are seeing the value and seeing how to scale and do these in really profitable sales.
Why do you think we're starting? Because I see more private equity individuals and firms look at this space. Why are they looking at this space more closely now?
Well, I think the private equity firms, they're just very interested in healthcare. Healthcare presents for them a very almost recession-proof kind of business, right? So it's not going away. We have a tremendous demand for healthcare services. And especially when they see ones like concierge or dermatology or plastic surgery or even mental health practices and specialty mental health providers, dental practices, if they're seeing a lot of cash and a lot of maybe non-insurance based payments and some with insurance, but I think they're seeing ways that they can really capitalize on the financial, prowess of the business and then maybe scale it, make it bigger and take over some of those administrative burdens for the practice and make it even more profitable. So definitely seeing all that in the space.
Is there, from your vantage point, because it's such a unique seat on the bus, pros and cons of private equity in healthcare?
Oh, that's a hard one. So, I mean, from a practitioner, it's great legal work. Like it's great deal work, and we love doing it. The providers that I've been involved with, some love it and have had great experiences. And, it was a really good exit for them where their practice was taken care of and they had a really good, retirement financial package by it. And then I've had some people that they were, maybe less enthusiastic as to how the transition went. Some owners and founders of practices, they often stay like 5 years after the sale to private equity. And it's oftentimes hard to be an employee after you were an owner, right? And you see things, and that's any business, right? So you all of a sudden you feel differently about it because you don't get to make all the decisions, which that's the deal. You sold to someone else and they're going to not do everything the same way you do it. So I see both sides, and I see, the value of these outside firms and private equity, places coming in and adding, infusing cath and creating innovations and economies of scale. But then I see from the provider side that for certain providers, it works really well in certain practices. And for certain providers, it's very hard to give up that ownership and control that they had for so long, that they really think of the practice as kind of their baby. So yeah, so it's a double-edged sword. I think there's
Yeah, for sure. Because
again, it's not one size fits all for that either, right?
Yeah.
There's some owners are really, really happy with it and really happy with their partnerships with the PE firms afterwards. And, like anything, there's different players in the marketplace, and some work really well and some just don't have a great fit after the sale. So, definitely it's another one where it's not all the same and not each transaction is the same. But I would say overall, the doctors that have gone through with it, they were often kind of nearing retirement age, so they were happy with it, with the payout and the package that they got.
Um, Marketing the annual exam. What's your thoughts on that?
So the annual exam, I often find, especially if you're taking Medicare, it's tricky because, right, Medicare covers an annual exam. So I always warn and kind of caution doctors, you can't have this be an exam that would be covered by Medicare, or if you're taking commercial insurance, that. So if you're really wanting to market this as a very different, and a lot of them do, like a wellness evaluation that is really different than an annual exam, and you have to be very transparent as to why it's different and what services you're giving that aren't covered by these other, typical annual physicals that people are used to. So I think that's part of the value and part of the special relationship you're creating is telling them and making sure the patient understands why this is so different, and why the services are different, and why maybe you see certain labs as necessary that other annual physicals don't have, or maybe because you have so much time with them, you have different wellness and dietary and physical fitness and different plans like that might not be the same as your annual physical. But I think if you're going to market it as this is your big point of sale, then you have to make sure that it really is different and it's not something that's already covered by Medicare or commercial insurance. If you're taking those.
The scary part of saying, I want to do this, I'm committed, but I don't want to shut off the payer, the plan integration. I want to be, eligible for employer funding potentially in this practice along the line. I don't mind still taking Medicare, but it just sounds maybe like I'm scared to do that. How do you help them overcome that? Because it's like, I don't want to be just all cash pay, self pay.
Yeah.
And provide that. So how do you help them overcome that objection or thought
Well,
process?
I think it's a valid fear. So, I'm not, doing a market research study of their patient population, what the patients can afford or will do. So I will say that there's certain maybe areas and certain, patient populations that this wouldn't be the right fit. So if they come to me and they say, I work in a really, lower socioeconomic area and I want to do this, unless you have some really specialty patient population within that environment, that doesn't make a ton of sense to me, even if it's model you want to do. Uh, so I think it isn't something to push off or act like it's not a significant concern. But I think, like you said, that maybe you don't take commercial payers, but you take Medicare, right? Or maybe you start doing everything and then see how it goes and transition later on. But it definitely is a fear. And so I kind of go off their lead. I've been spoiled. I think a lot of my concierge doctors that have converted have come to me, after having really big patient panels that they've known for a very long time. And even so much so that the patients have said, will you go concierge? Like, I am looking for this kind of care. I can't get in to see you ever when I need to. Me and my spouse are older. We really want to be able to see you. We have chronic health concerns and we would pay for this care. So a lot of them that I encounter, luckily, like I said, I'm a little spoiled. They were kind of already spoiled, or the superstars, and knew their patient population. So they knew when they approached me that they probably were going to have a pretty loyal following. But the ones that are more concerned, I would say definitely get an outside consultant to maybe help you go through the demographics. If you're really worried about whether your patient population would be able to handle this or would be amenable to it, then I think that's when you employ other experts and consultants to see if this is the right move for you.
Yeah. Well, that has all been super helpful. Thank you for walking through that lightning round. Our last two questions for you and our guest today has been Jonna Eimer. She's a health law attorney. We'll put the links on how to connect with her. She's also a shareholder at Roetzel and Andress in Chicago, but you work with doctors all over the place, considering moves into concierge medicine as well as other subscription models. But again, it's not a one size fits all. And as we've talked about today, there's a lot to this. And I always say to the doctors, I'm usually the first stop, and then I connect them with folks like yourself and others. I'm saying, go get your unofficial MBA. In fact, you need to start writing down your questions, because you're going to have a whole lot of them in the next month or three. So final two questions. What book is on your nightstand or in your Audible library right now that you're reading? Might be, we put out a summer reading list and a Christmas holiday reading list for doctors. And we always think, hey, we should always ask our guests, what are they reading? Whether it's pleasure or business or self-help. Tell us a little bit about what you're reading or what book you give away the most.
Oh, what book do I give away the most? I'm not sure about that one. What's on my nightstand, which I have not read much of yet, was maybe more, it's nothing to do with medicine, but it was Henry Kissinger's book. I think it's called The New World Order, or the most recent one. I think there's been so much political news all over the place and questioning of institutions. So I guess that's maybe how it relates to healthcare, like challenging institutions, that I was trying to go back and not necessarily, I don't know that I agree, disagree, but reading different thought leaders in the space at different times, trying to understand our current political environment and how we got here. So that's what I have. I don't know if I have one directly related to healthcare, but maybe that kind of does, because it's challenging, like acceptance.
So that's great.
Yeah.
No, we get, and you'd be surprised, even when I'm talking with clinicians themselves, it's usually, I would say 80% of the time, it's not medicine or healthcare related at all. It's usually self-help business or a personal read. But it will never beat the most odd one I had from a dentist that I interviewed. He was reading a book about archaeological studies about our teeth and about the vegetation that they were eating and how that their teeth were so much healthier back then because of a lot of different vegetation and meats and the way that things are commercialized today and processed and so on. So that's the oddest book I think I've ever seen on the list. But our final question for you, Jonna, is a question we ask of all of our guests. If you were to hang up your spurs and be like, I'm just done, like that last conversation, I could die happy. The question is, what do you want to be known for?
I think what I would most like to be known for is to be a helper, right? A problem solver and a helper, I would say two things that I think my patients and hopefully even my family and friends come to me for advice for whether it's legal or otherwise, hopefully, oftentimes legal. But I think that's what I would like to be known for is for someone who helps and advises people. I think that's what I would like to be known for.
Amen. Well, that is a wonderful mission and vision. And our guest today has been Jonna Eimer. She's with Roetzel and Andress. She's a health law attorney. If you need health expertise, this is not a sponsored podcast. We just believe in interviewing and talking and discussing this industry and the challenges and opportunities, the tensions to manage and the problems to solve in this space with experts in this space. And Jonna, thank you so much for being with us. We'll put the links on how to connect with you if you want to connect with Jonna and her team. They're doing a great work over there, and we think that she's definitely going to be somebody that we can't wait to have a next conversation with in the very near future. So thank you, Jonna, for being our guest today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.